On September 9th, 2025, the world woke up to an unprecedented event: Israeli jets striking targets inside Doha, Qatar. The attack was aimed at Hamas officials meeting in the Qatari capital, where discussions for a ceasefire were underway. For Israel, this was about neutralizing militant leadership. For Qatar and much of the Arab and Muslim world, it was a shocking violation of sovereignty, a dangerous precedent, and perhaps a sign of a new phase in regional conflict. The central question is clear: was Israel deliberately testing how far Arab states would go in response? According to multiple reports, Israeli forces carried out a precision strike targeting a Hamas meeting site in Doha. Several mid-ranking Hamas members were killed, though senior leaders reportedly escaped. Tragically, a Qatari security officer also lost his life. Qatar's foreign ministry issued a strongly worded condemnation, calling the attack cowardly, treacherous, and an act of state terrorism. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights quickly weighed in, warning that the strike represented a serious violation of international law and threatened regional stability. This wasn't just about a military operation, it was about the precedent it set: an armed strike in a neutral state's capital against individuals engaged, at least officially, in diplomacy. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down after the attack. He declared that Hamas leaders would be pursued wherever they are, signaling that even capitals like Doha were not off limits if Israel saw operational value in striking there. This was the spark that set off one of the most contentious diplomatic debates in recent Middle Eastern history. Israel has a long record of targeting adversaries outside its borders: Damascus, Beirut, even in European capitals during the Cold War years. But Doha is different. Qatar has positioned itself as a mediator in conflicts across the region, from the Gaza war to Taliban negotiations. The strike directly undermined that role, not just symbolically, but practically. If Hamas leaders or any warring faction no longer feel safe under Qatar's mediation umbrella, why would they attend talks there? The act also clashed with Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity of another state. While Israel may argue self-defense, Qatar was not at war with Israel, nor had it consented to hosting hostile operations on its soil. The violation wasn't just military, it was diplomatic, legal, and political all at once. And that's why analysts describe this as a threshold-testing moment. Israel wasn't only attacking Hamas, it was probing to see how Arab states, and indeed the wider world, would respond to an operation carried out in one of their capitals. Qatar moved swiftly to convene an extraordinary Arab Islamic summit in Doha. Leaders from across the region gathered in solidarity, issuing joint communiques condemning the Israeli strike and affirming Qatar's sovereignty. The language was strong. Israel's act was described as state terrorism, a violation of international norms, and a deliberate attack on peace efforts. Yet behind closed doors, fissures appeared. Some countries, like Algeria and Iran, pushed for tougher measures: suspension of diplomatic ties, economic retaliation, or formal legal action at the United Nations. Others, including several Gulf states, were far more cautious. They feared damaging ties with Washington or destabilizing fragile regional economic projects tied to energy markets. The result was a familiar outcome: unity in rhetoric, division in policy. The summit showed solidarity with Qatar, but stopped short of imposing the kinds of costs that might deter Israel from similar actions in the future. For Israel, that outcome may have been the real test. How far can it go before statements turn into sanctions? No actor felt the shockwaves of the Doha strike more acutely than the United States. Washington is Qatar's closest security partner and operates its largest Middle East airbase, Al Udeid Air Base, on Qatari soil. Within days, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio landed in Doha. Standing alongside Qatari officials, Rubio praised Qatar's role as a mediator and warned of a short window to salvage a Gaza ceasefire. More importantly, he announced that the US and Qatar were finalizing an enhanced defense cooperation agreement, a signal of reassurance to Doha and a subtle message to others that the US still stands behind its Gulf partners. Yet Washington's balancing act was delicate. While reaffirming security ties with Qatar, US officials avoided directly condemning Israel's strike. The Biden administration's line was clear: Hamas must be contained, Qatar must remain protected, and Israel must not be alienated. This ambiguity feeds the perception in the Gulf that Israel is not only testing Arab states' red lines, but also Washington's willingness to enforce them. From a legal standpoint, the strike raises profound questions. International law generally permits the use of force only in self-defense or with the consent of the host state. Qatar did not give such consent. Israel's defense is that Hamas leaders are directing attacks against Israel and that striking them constitutes self-defense. But critics counter that such an argument becomes shaky when extended to neutral third states, especially those engaged in mediation. The United Nations Human Rights Office warned that targeting a mediator's capital not only undermines sovereignty, but could also discourage future peace processes. If mediators cannot guarantee safety, how can conflict parties engage in good faith negotiations? This is why many legal experts and diplomats view the Doha strike not just as a violation of Qatar's sovereignty, but as a direct attack on diplomacy itself. Qatar is not just another small Gulf state. It hosts the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest US military facility in the Middle East, and a vital hub for Central Command CENTCOM. That reality makes the Israeli strike in Doha even more consequential. The presence of thousands of American troops, advanced aircraft and logistics infrastructure at Al Udeid means that any strike on Qatari soil automatically implicates US security interests. Washington knows this. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement being negotiated after the strike is designed to reinforce that deterrent signal. But here's the paradox. While the US tightens defense ties with Qatar, it avoids confronting Israel directly over the incident. This creates a perception problem. If Israel can strike in Doha, where American forces are stationed nearby, and still avoid major fallout, what message does that send to other Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Kuwait that rely on US defense guarantees? Arab commentators have begun asking, if Washington cannot or will not deter Israel from crossing this line, what happens if Iran or another adversary tests the same threshold? The incident has reignited old doubts about whether the US is a reliable security guarantor in the region. The concept of testing thresholds is not abstract. Israel's actions in Doha provide concrete markers for analysts to watch in the coming months. Follow-on strikes beyond Gaza or Lebanon. If Israel conducts similar extraterritorial operations in Gulf capitals or other neutral states, it will confirm that Doha was not an isolated event, but part of a broader strategy. Arab collective action, or lack thereof. The Arab Islamic Summit in Doha produced fiery rhetoric, but little coordinated action. If states begin to impose tangible costs, such as restricting Israeli airspace access, downgrading diplomatic ties, or leveraging oil and gas power, that would signal a new threshold has been reached. Normalization politics. The Abraham Accords and other normalization tracks are at stake. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi warned that continued escalation risks undermining peace efforts. Watch Saudi Arabia and the UAE especially. Their decisions will reveal whether normalization withstands the shock. US-Qatar Defense Pact details the scope of the new deal, whether it includes expanded basing rights, missile defense integration, or intelligence sharing, will show how seriously Washington wants to raise deterrence around Doha. Legal and UN tracks. If Qatar or a coalition of Arab states push the case to the UN Security Council or international courts, it could raise the diplomatic cost for Israel. So far, the response has been heavy on statements, light on enforcement. Each of these markers will help answer the title question: is Israel truly testing Arab states' red lines? To understand Doha, it's useful to situate it within Israel's broader strategic doctrine. For decades, Israel has pursued an aggressive policy of targeting adversary leaders abroad, whether in Damascus, Beirut, or beyond. These operations are rooted in the belief that decapitating hostile leadership networks creates deterrence and operational disruption. But striking in Doha was qualitatively different. Unlike Syria or Lebanon, countries in direct confrontation with Israel, Qatar is a US ally, a mediator, and not engaged in hostilities with Israel. That choice suggests Israel is expanding its operational envelope. Some analysts argue this expansion is a deliberate test, gauging whether Arab states, the UN, or Washington will impose meaningful consequences. If the backlash is limited, Israel can conclude that its freedom of action extends even into friendly or neutral capitals. Others caution against overreading. They argue that Israel saw a fleeting intelligence opportunity, high-value Hamas targets in one place, and acted regardless of the diplomatic risk. From this perspective, Doha was not a strategic test, but a tactical decision with outsized consequences. Either way, the outcome is the same. Arab states now face the uncomfortable reality that Israel is willing to operate in their capitals if it deems the threat severe enough. Qatar has leaned heavily into its identity as a mediator. From hosting Hamas's political office to brokering prisoner exchanges, Doha has carved out a niche as the region's go-between. That identity is now under strain. The strike undermines Qatar's credibility as a safe host for negotiations. If militant groups or political leaders fear they might be targeted in Doha, they may refuse to attend future talks or demand extensive security guarantees. That could push mediation out of the Arab world entirely and into Europe or Asia, weakening Arab agency in their own region's conflicts. At the same time, the Arab Islamic Summit revealed the limits of regional solidarity. While leaders rallied rhetorically around Qatar, divisions over actual responses were glaring. Energy politics, relations with Washington, and rivalries among Gulf states all tempered the willingness to escalate. For Israel, this may be the key takeaway. Diplomatic costs are manageable as long as Arab states remain divided. Arab states issue strong statements but take no concrete measures. Israel interprets this as tacit acceptance and continues to strike adversaries wherever it sees fit. This risks normalizing such operations and eroding international norms around sovereignty. A coalition of Arab states imposes tangible costs, economic measures, diplomatic downgrades, or even airspace restrictions. This would mark a true threshold being crossed and could constrain Israel's calculus. Washington leverages its influence to quietly broker new understandings. Israel refrains from striking in allied capitals, while Gulf states redouble efforts to contain Hamas politically. This would preserve US credibility and prevent escalation, but requires delicate balancing. Israel carries out another high-profile extraterritorial strike, perhaps in another Gulf state, provoking a stronger Arab response. The cycle escalates, potentially threatening normalization and widening the conflict beyond Gaza. So, is Israel testing Arab states' response thresholds? The evidence suggests yes. By striking in Doha, Israel crossed into a new domain, hitting not just its enemies, but the sanctity of a mediator's capital. The reaction so far has been strong in words, weak in deeds. That imbalance may encourage Israel to believe the costs are bearable, but thresholds are not static. If Arab states coordinate tangible responses, if Washington recalibrates its balance, or if Qatar leverages its global energy and diplomatic clout, the equation could shift. Until then, Israel's risk calculus remains clear. Testing the limits is worth it, because the price of crossing them has yet to be paid.